It is fully into the NHL's off season. So many have already entered cottages and will not emerge again until September. I don't even know if EJ Hradek of NHL Network has a cottage. Let's find out. Do you have a cottage, sir?
Yeah, I have like a tool shed in my backyard, which is about 8 by 7. I don't know. Maybe I could go there, but I don't think the spiders and the various insects that live in there would be that happy to see me.
They would be very happy to see you, EJ Hradek. But I would not go there. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So I would say the answer to that question is an emphatic no. I don't have cottage.
All right. Let's start a little bit with the Hurricanes, then we'll move on. We'll move around maybe the division.
Right.
And just maybe the conference or things that had jumped out to you. I know you had asked me over the weekend why about the Carolina trade of K'Andre Miller, and as it's coming out, news is coming out that Carolina was apparently throwing around the threat, whether it's direct threat or the perceived threat of offer sheets, one to Evan Bouchard, which Edmonton warded off by signing him to a contract. And apparently they directly reached out to the Rangers about K'Andre Miller, and they ultimately worked out a deal. And maybe the deal looks like it is because they were going to offer sheet him, but I know you had suggested that maybe they gave up too much for somebody the Rangers were going to move. So let's just start there. What do you think of that trade?
Well, I am a fan of K'Andre Miller. I think that certainly last year, nobody on the Rangers played well last year.
Exactly.
And I don't think he was really well served by, the coaching staff. Phil Housley, was the guy running into defense. I just don't think Phil has been great in his career as a young defenseman. So I think there's a lot of upside with K'Andre Miller. He's big, he's long, he skates well, he's athletic, he's very young still in his career. I like the upside, and I think he's a good player. And I think for Carolina to get him is, if they work with him and get him back to where I think he is, and maybe get him back on that right trajectory, I think it's a great acquisition for them. I just was a little surprised, and thus I sent you that note.
Yeah.
A first, a second, and a player. Now, our back and forth, you gave me your thoughts on Scott Morrow, and, maybe I thought he was a little bit, further up the food chain than he is. But the Rangers definitely, from being up here and listening to all the coverage of the Rangers and being around the people that I've been around, the feeling is that the Rangers were going to move K'Andre Miller. And, because they had other worries, and they were going to get Gavrikov, and they had to spend money on him. They were worried about Will Cooley and somebody maybe offer sheeting him.
Yeah.
So I just felt like when I look at it, I'm like a player, a first, and I guess it's top 10 protected. So that's critical for next year, because if something does go wrong and you end up with in a lottery and you win the lottery, you don't want to be handing
right
a generational player and Gavin McKenna over to another franchise, particularly your own division. So, that would have been worrisome. But I just felt like, why did that be a second? Why couldn't it have been a fourth? Why couldn't it have been a sixth?
Right.
Something of that nature. Because the Rangers, I thought, were up against it in terms of what they wanted to do. And in fact, the kind of, again, the coverage from others here in this area is that Chris Drury did this terrific job, getting a lot for someone that they were going to move. So, in the end, they're draft picks, and teams have to make those draft picks work. But, that was my feeling, and that's why I reached out to you. Was like, boy, I thought they could have maybe, held the line and given a later pick than a second as one of the pieces.
EJ Hradek, NHL Network, at EJ Hradek_NHL on Twitter, is joining us here in the Adam Gold Show. I certainly agree. When you think about if the Rangers were ultimately going to move Miller, they did get a fair amount for him. I don't think anybody here with the Hurricanes believes that first round pick is going to be earlier than, say, 28 or so.
Yeah.
Right? So, in some ways that has less value. Plus, if you're looking at it from a Hurricanes perspective, that first-round pick is really 3 second-round picks based on what they do with first-round picks. But
that's true. They have been very true to form with what they do with picks. It's like this year at the draft, like when they came up and they traded back, I just started laughing.
Yeah.
I was like, it's unbelievable. It's like, it's what they do. But, hey, it works for them.
I waited 4 hours. I had to pay attention to 4 hours of the draft, and I knew what they were going to do because unless somebody who they have a grade on in the top 10 falls to and they pick 29th, they're not keeping that pick because they just don't see the value being any different than where they picked first, which was 41st in the draft. They did a very good job of collecting I think pretty good value for them. But we'll get to that maybe in a different conversation. But to me, when I look at what Carolina needed, is that I thought they needed to get better on the right side defensively. And Miller is a left. So it puts them in a position where and I don't think it'll happen in year one, but I think and maybe it'll happen toward the end of year one, but certainly going forward. The thought process has to be that Alexander Nikishin will be a top 4 defenseman for them, which gives you 3 of your top 4 all being left-sided, and one of them is going to have to play the right side. The people I talk to say it's most likely Slavin. And, man, I wouldn't move him at all. I would hope that one of the others could play the right side. How would you see it?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to fool with Slavin either. I mean, just because he's such a good player, and he's he can do it because he's such a good player. But why would you want to put him in a position where he's less than he is in another spot? So, but these are the things, and it's not set in stone that all these guys will continue to be there. I mean, things change, right? Yep. I mean, so maybe they use one of them as an asset to move in a different direction. You don't know, but. I don't think Miller is necessarily suited to be a right side guy. That's just kind of my thinking with him. And obviously the young kid, we don't really know, for sure how that's going to play out, but he's a young player. And, sometimes, these guys can fool you and they like playing on the offside.
Yep.
But I don't love it. I like to have, strong side guys on each side. That's just, maybe I'm just an old school guy when it comes to that stuff, but I like that better. I think guys are better on their strong sides. So, but that's something that management and and Roddy Brind'amour and the coaching staff will have to figure out moving forward. But the bottom line is they got, I think, a guy in K'Andre Miller that, like I said, he's had some good experience in the NHL. Like he's had a couple of good years, and then the last 2 have been. Particularly last year, but again, everybody was bad. The Rangers. I just think that he's, you're always looking to take, great players, good players. They're not available and everything's gone well. I think we've had this conversation before. So it wasn't a great year. The Rangers are moving on from K'Andre Miller. Carolina sees the upside. He's still a young player. You go take a shot. You get him. And I guess in the end, it's, you gave up the first, you gave up the second, you gave up Morrow. I mean, if K'Andre Miller becomes a player that I think he can be and they think he can be, then it was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you end up with the best player in the trade, even though he was the only player. Oh, no, Scott Morrow was in the trade too. I think Morrow is at least a year away from being a regular in the NHL, and it might take him even a little bit longer than that.
It's funny, though. It's funny, Adam, because Morrow was someone that, again, followed him from afar. You see it from closer. Is that he seemed like he was a guy that was going to be part of their kind of future, and therefore I was kind of surprised. I was like, they were willing to move him and those picks, but in the end, I guess the feelings about players change, or the feelings about players are kept within the organization, which is the best thing to do, because then when you move them, if you didn't think they were that good to begin with, you don't want to devalue the asset. I think that's a little bit of what happened to Miller.
Yeah.
So again, I think his value, had come a little bit down just because of the way that he's been, he had a tough year, but just the way he was talked about, through the media by management. So anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Let's move on to Nick Ehlers. Carolina gets once Mitch Marner was off the board, and we kind of knew that was off the board well before we got to July 1. Nick Ehlers was the number one free agent offensive performer. Carolina gets him. I was surprised that it was 6 years and not 7. Don't really understand why it was 6 and not 7. Who knows? Maybe 7 is unlucky for somebody. I mean, $8.5 million is, I think, a good number for Nick. I think if he performs well offensively, $8.5 million is going to look like a good value down the road, knowing where the cap is going. How did you look at that signing?
Well, it seemed like, again, it was like Gavrikov coming to the Rangers.
Right.
Like, everybody kind of knew it was happening. For whatever reason, it was in the cards. And it seemed like the same way with Nick Ehlers, even though he waited a couple of days. It seemed like the thinking was that he's going to Carolina. And that's how it ended up, albeit a couple of days. And the contract didn't quite look, maybe because you say, like, you're right, I would think, why not get that 7th year, especially, for a player that by that point in time, probably would love to have that 7th year. But maybe the team held firm on that. And I don't, Nick isn't, he's been a good player, but he's not Mitch Marner. He's not going to hold you up for a 7th year. I think there was probably a lot, other teams that were talking to him probably didn't want to give him a 7th year. It's a lot. So, especially with, in the new CBA down the road, when that gets papered, this idea of, that's going to go down anyway, right? Like you're going to be able to get, it's not going to be 8 and 7 for guys. It's going to be 7 and 6. So whatever the reason, he's at 6 years. He's a guy I think that fits, just like K'Andre Miller. I think he fits what you want to do in Carolina. He's a really good skater. Every once in a while he gets banged up, so that's been more so over the last, I think, 2 years. So he's missed some games in there, but he's a good offensive player. He's a good skater. I think he fits what they want to do. And the best part of it is, Adam, he wants to be there.
Yeah.
He wanted to be there. He's, he had the choice. He could have went anywhere. He had a lot of options, I'm sure, and he opted to go there. So I think that's always a great thing for any franchise, and particularly a franchise where there have been situations where the player doesn't want to be there. So, I think it's been a really good, free agency period to get players that fit and seem happy to be there. And, we'll see how it works in the end.
EJ Hradek is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. All right, since we've kind of talked about the Rangers because of K'Andre Miller, are the Rangers, do you think the Rangers have put themselves back into a spot where we can expect them to make the playoffs? There's only 8 spots in the East, and only 3 came from the Metro last time. The Islanders, I'm not sure the Islanders got that much better, but the Islanders certainly adding Matthew Schaefer, who I assume is going to be in the lineup. But the Islanders, I thought, really underachieved. Maybe a changing of the guard. Devils should be good. How do you look at, look at the Metro right now?
Okay. Well, like I said, the Capitals had the big year, right? So the question will be, will the Capitals regress? The Capitals had the big year. They won the division out. They lost to the Hurricanes in the second round. But, it seemed like it was one of those years for the Capitals that everything went well, particularly in the first, 2/3 of the season. Yep. And they weren't quite the same team in the final third of the season. So where are the Capitals going to be this year? Because as much as I liked a lot of things about them last year, they have the look of a team that, maybe things don't go as well this year and it's more of a struggle.
Right.
Right? So that, I don't think it's a guarantee. The Devils were good until everybody got hurt, or at least the Devils were good right until, I think, Christmas. They were really good. Mm-hmm. And then they went into they had some problems, and then they got injuries. And you know what? They battled in the playoffs against a Carolina team, which I don't think they match up particularly well against. And, they ended up losing in a short series, but I give them credit because they were missing so many players. And in fact, Brian Dumoulin played so well that he was able to get a brand new 3-year contract with the LA Kings.
Yeah.
So good for him. But so the Devils, I mean, on paper, they should be in the mix, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if Jack Hughes is healthy and Luke Hughes advances in his career, and they have a good goaltender, so they should be, they should be in the mix. As for the Rangers, it's hard for me to tell you because the reverse of the Capitals, the Rangers had everything go wrong last year.
Mm-hmm.
And, now they brought in Mike Sullivan, who is a really good coach, and I think overdue for a change of scenery, and I think it'll be good for him. They have a great goalie in Shesterkin. They've made some changes on defense. They brought in Gavrikov to play alongside Fox. They got to hope Fox is healthier and can regain, the play that, had him in the mix or had him winning a Norris Trophy, although I didn't really think he should have won the Norris Trophy that year, but that's another discussion. But he was nonetheless, he was a really good defenseman. So they need him to be better. They made some other changes to their defense. They have a full year of JT Miller. They're hoping some young players can move forward. But I still look at their team, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, they've got Zibanejad, who has kind of been going backwards in his career the last couple of years. Trocheck kind of would be great as a third center, but he has to play higher. Panarin's going into the last year of his contract. He's been a terrific free agent for them. Every year he's, their leading scorer. I just think that with Sullivan being there, Shesterkin is terrific in goal. They've made some changes. They'll come to camp focused. They're a team that played poorly last year that I expect to play better this year, but I still don't think they're a real threat, unless they can make some other changes up front because they're either too young or too old in some areas up front. So we'll see where it goes, but I do think the Rangers, because of the coaching change, because of the goaltender, and because some of the other tweaks, will probably be a more difficult team to play against this year.
Is it fair to say that everybody in the Metro should be happy that they're not in the Atlantic?
Yes, I think that's very fair to say. And, you mentioned Matthew Schaefer with the Islanders, and you're probably right. He will probably get a look to play with the Islanders. But, I just think, first of all, that kid is electric. He's got an electric personality. He is magnetic. And he is going to be a great thing for this league and for that franchise. I would desperately beg him to go play a year of college hockey because he played 17 games last year. And while he's got pretty good size, he's lanky, he's getting stronger, he's getting bigger. He played 17 games last year. To come in and play at the National Hockey League level on defense, where it is difficult, it's hard to come in and be a difference maker as a defenseman without, at that age. I would literally beg him because I am so fascinated by him as a person and a player, especially now with that window. Going back to Erie doesn't make much sense. He'll dominate in the Ontario League.
Right.
But there's a window now for these guys to go play a year at Michigan State or wherever you want. Division, they're happy to take you. They might even pay you to be there, right?
Yes.
It's just, I've been I use Michigan State as an example because I visited there last year. I saw their training facilities there and what those kind of universities have to offer. They're better than what the NHL teams have to offer.
Yeah.
So, to me, a year in that environment where you're working, you have more time to work on physical development and your mental life development as well. And you're playing the 40 games, and you're playing against guys that are a little bit older, but not 30-year-old grizzled veterans in the American League and not 17-year-olds in the OHL. I think it's a great option, as for players. We can discuss the merits of, how that whole thing is changing.
Right.
With the NCAA and junior hockey. But for those players who are the top-end guys, to have a year to play where, they're not they're not dominating younger kids in the OHL or Western League or Quebec League, and not in a situation, in most cases, you can't play in the American League, but In some cases, the Europeans, they end up in the American League, and that's a very tough league. So I would tell Matthew Schaefer again, I would just say, listen, find one of those spots. That's your path.
Yeah.
And then see where you're at the end of the year, because like Cale Makar did 2 years of college.
It's amazing.
And it hasn't hurt him.
I think you're right.
I believe Quinn Hughes did his second year.
Yeah.
I like that path, especially for defensemen, because it is such a tough position to play. And then, like I said, Matthew is just, I don't know how anyone's career is going to work out, because we've seen guys that we think are going to be fantastic,
right,
and it doesn't happen for whatever reason.
Adam Fox played 3 years at Harvard. All right, EJ
Redd,
go. Back to the tool shed.
There you have. There's my plea.
Into the tool shed for you, EJ Hradek.
Right.
I appreciate your time.
Yes.
As long as you have coverage in the tool shed, I will hit you up soon. Thank you so much.
All right. Listen, I'm hosting NHL Tonight 3 times this week, so I'm working. So
look
if you
at
need
you.
me, I'm here.
There's no off season. All right, EJ. Take care. I'll talk to you very soon.
Take care.
You got it,
buddy.